So welcome to Wichita Public Library's Excel 4 Graphs and Pivot Tables class. This is a 90-minute class. And my name is Ben Romp. I'm a technology trainer here at the Advanced Learning Library of Wichita Public Library, being assisted by Ken Warner. If you have any questions at any time, please just post those in the chat. You make sure I got my chat up so I can see that. So we're gonna be using a spreadsheet called Graphs and Pivot Tables that is available in the Google Drive folder. Let me post that again. If you're watching on YouTube, it should be available. The link should be in the description of the video. And we're going to be doing a couple of different graphs and charts, spreadsheets, and then maybe if we have time, we'll do a couple of pivot tables. We'll do the one pivot table for sure on auto inventory. And there's some other resources. There's some really good YouTube tutorials, as well as the GCF Learn Free. We'll be talking about that later. And go over a couple of good shortcuts as well. So we'll just jump right in to, I'm gonna just do this full screen. So some of the simple terminology that we use in Excel. We of course have the ribbon across the top with all of the commands separated into tabs. We have the Home tab with most of the most popular commands. We'll also be using the Insert tab today. That's where you can insert your charts, and which is the same thing as a graph, and your pivot tables. And then there's also what we call contextual tabs, which you'll see as we insert elements, there will show up a tab on the ribbon for that element. So when we do a pivot table, there will be some pivot table tools on the ribbon, and as well, and the same thing for the charts and graphs. And this is a workbook, is the name of the file. An Excel file is called a workbook, and it is made up of one or more worksheets. We have the worksheets in tabs across the bottom here. There's an example of a chart for this branch sales table that we have here, spreadsheet. And there's the others, and there's the auto inventory that we'll be doing a pivot table for. So what is a graph? A graph is a visual representation of data. And what is a pivot table? Quickly, we'll come back to this, of course, but a pivot table is an interactive way to summarize large amounts of data. And I'll just mention that pivot tables are most useful with large amounts of data. If you don't have a lot of data, the value of a pivot table is not as apparent. But when you have tons and tons of rows of data, you can have thousands, even millions of rows of data and summarize them with a pivot table. It's a really powerful tool for summarizing data and pulling out different things. You can pivot the table, as we'll see, to pull out different elements of your data. So these are data summary tools. So first we're going to talk about creating graphs. A graph chart is another name for graph. When is using a graph appropriate? When you want to visually represent data. And graphs work best with two axes of information. If you have too much more, then they're not as useful. So to start with, to insert a graph, we're still, there's the Home tab. I'm gonna go back there to the Insert tab. And so you wanna make sure before you insert a chart from one of these representations of the different charts, you wanna make sure you've got a piece of your data selected. Anywhere in your data needs to be selected in order to insert the chart. If I try to insert a chart from this blank cell and I click a button here, there's the chart, but it's blank. So I'm just gonna click that and hit the delete button on my keyboard. And we'll try again. I'm gonna click anywhere in my data and go back to the Insert tab. And so as you mouse over these different elements on the ribbon, you can always get a pop-up description of, or at least with the name of that element. And with the chart types here, each of these icons is a different chart type, and it gives you the description. The most common are bar column or bar charts and line charts. And there's a little information here about what when to use them. The line chart says use this chart type to show trends over time. That's a good chart for showing change over time. And the column or bar chart is probably the most common one. And it says, click the arrow to see different types, and you can get a preview. So as I mouse over the first here that's described as a clustered column, you get a preview of that. Now I've only clicked on the icon up here, and then I'm mousing over the others. So I haven't clicked on any, and you can see the different styles. Let's see. And then there's you've got a pie chart and a whole bunch of other types of charts. So let's just grab one of these less common ones, a hierarchy chart. We'll just do a tree map. So that doesn't look super helpful, but but as soon as we have a chart here, you notice we have chart tools on the ribbon, and there's a bunch of chart styles here. You can change the colors. There's a quick layout button. And over here on the right, there's a change chart type. So we can say, well, that chart is not working for me. So let's go back to one of the simpler ones. Let's go to the column chart and just click on the first one. And then I'll click OK. And that's a little better. So I forgot to mention that what we're dealing with is a spreadsheet of sales figures for 3 branches of a store in the Denver area for January through December for a certain year. We'll call it 2021. And so the numbers by themselves don't really tell you much, but when you put them on a chart, then you begin to be able to kind of pull out some trends because of the visual representation. So first, right away, one of the things that we can do, we have control over every element of this chart. So one of the things we can do is notice these when my mouse is over the middle of the chart in a blank area, it has that 4-way cursor, which means that I can move it around the page. And there are these in the corners and in the middles of the sides, there are these circles. And when I mouse over those, you see the double arrow in the corners gives you the diagonal. And if I click and drag one of those, I can resize the chart and get a better view there. So one of the things that's going on this chart is that we have some labels on the graph that I think are showing, well, it's in white and they're really not useful. So if we click on the so first of all, up above on the ribbon, we have chart elements. The first thing on the far left of the chart tools design part of the ribbon. Again, this is what we call a contextual tab that shows up after we insert the chart. We have chart tools on the ribbon as long as that is selected. If I click away from my chart, that tab goes away because it's a contextual tab. I have to have that element selected in order for it to show up on the tab, but then it has all of the commands here that are super useful in dealing with my chart. So the add chart element has a complete list here. I think what we're dealing with is data labels. You can also access these elements from the shortcut on the screen here. The little plus sign is a chart, also a chart elements. And this is a little more handy sometimes. It has little check boxes. So there's data labels. I'm going to uncheck that. It gets rid of those little data labels. It was just the months of the year anyway, and it was in white. You couldn't really see it. So we'll just clear those out. That looks much better. Up on the ribbon here, there's a change colors option. I can try some different colors. There's some preset sort of palettes of colors, groups of colors. And I think I like the original one the best. There's also some options for monochromatic, which is good for if you're going to print something in black and white. There's also an actual black and white option. So you have the darker bars indicating the Denver store here, the medium shade for Aurora, and the lightest one being, or the other way around, I guess. The lightest one is the Aurora, and middle one is Lakewood. Let's go back to the original colors. I think those are easiest to work with here. So you can also use this chart styles group here. Notice as I mouse over these, it shows some different styles. These are all preset styles. So this one's interesting. It's got the months kind of run together over here. We can expand that to make them fit a little better. And then this one, has data labels, which are not great for reading. But I like kind of like the style of the bars there. You've got a lot of different options. And of course, you can also go in and edit any of these elements that you like. There's even more options down here. So let's see. I just need to land on one and do some different things. Let's just go back to the original one. One of the things that's missing here is usually there's a title. We don't want access titles or data labels. We want chart title above chart. Okay, there it is. And I think we can type in a title. We'll say branch sales, call it 2021. And so this, one of the things that you can do, there's also a quick layout button here that lets us move things around. We can put this one puts the key on the side, and one has it above. This one includes a chart with all of the data in the bottom below the chart. Let's try this one, but we don't really need the access titles. So I'm gonna go to the access titles and turn those off by, I'm clicking on the chart element, mousing down to access titles, and then I clicked on primary horizontal, and that turned those off. I'll click on primary, primary vertical. I turned that off, so we don't need those. And maybe we should make the legend or key here with bigger text. I wonder if we can. I'm going to go back to the Home tab, click the increase font size, and that works pretty well. That's a little better. I'm going to go back to my chart tools design. And so that's another way to get to the chart styles that you see in the ribbon up here is this button. There's a filter button. I can take out certain months or certain stores and just view a subset of my data. And if I let's say I double click on an element, it'll give me some editing options on the right here. So for instance, let me close that and I'll demonstrate that again. I'm just in the chart area here on the right of the chart. I'm double clicking and it's giving me a format chart area toolbar on the right here. And so I could change the fill to, I could make the background a gray color, for instance, or I could use any color, make it a tan. color there. So you have control over every element. And you can also actually just click on something and delete it if you don't want it. So if I put in, let's say, well, let me undo that color. So we have these, that's the plot area. So here I've clicked on, if I don't want these lines, so that's the plot area, but if I click on the line here, you can see these red circles or blue circles on either end. If I just hit delete, that deletes those out of there. Let's see, that's also, it's just the grid lines here. I can click to get those back. And you see, and if I use the arrow to the right of the grid lines in this chart elements area, it shows me some other options. I can do primary and major and minor lines, and I can turn them off completely. Same with the data labels. I can, there's also more options, which again brings up this sidebar on the right, which gives me more control over all the aspects of the data labels in this case. So let's see. So if I did want to see those, I could go back to the Home tab and just change those to black there, although it seems like I'm only doing it on one of them. I'm gonna undo and let's see, come back here. Well, it's easy to get lost in the weeds. Let's just turn those off. More options. That's only selected some of them and not all of them. I'm not sure why. So I'm just going to turn those off. It looks better without them anyway. So that you want to remember. So right now I've clicked away from my chart, so I don't have my commands on the ribbon. I just have to click on the chart again to get my chart tools on the ribbon and go back there, and it gives me that control. And here under format, I can, there's some shortcuts to different styles where I can add elements as I choose. So let's say I don't want to, if I don't want this chart anymore, I'm just going to click on it and hit delete, and it's gone. So, and remember, if you do something like that and you change your mind, you've got your undo button. I can just click undo to bring that back, or I can redo and say, no, I really did want to get rid of it. So let's say I wanted to show what would be a good kind of chart to show the differences between or the compare income of locations for a single month. So let's say for March, I wanted to look at, so for something like that, a pie chart is really good. So I'm going to go to insert and just have some element of have a active cell within my data somewhere, and then insert a pie chart. Now, when I first do this, you see it's got all the months just for the Denver store. So what I need to do is I want to actually swap the row and column data, which there's a button for up here on the ribbon. So I want to show 1 month, specifically March, with all the 3 stores. So I'm just going to click switch row and column data. That's a little closer. Now it's showing just January sales for the Denver, Aurora, and Lakewood stores. I'm going to, I want to increase that font size. I'm going to use one of these. Actually, you can always go back to the home and use the font tools there to change the font. That's better. And let's make the text bold there too, and make it a little bigger. That looks good, but I'm still looking at January and I wanted March. So there's another tool on the ribbon. I've gone back to the home tab. I need to come back to my chart tools here. And next to that switch row and column, there's a select data. So you can add or remove the data that you want. So, and with the pie chart, it's just going to show the first one in the list. So I'm going to uncheck January and February and click OK. And now I've got March sales with my 3 stores, and that's what I was going for. All right, now what if we wanted to get a representation similar to the pie chart, showing the percentage of sales for each month of the year? So there's another type of chart that works well for that, and that's called a 100% stacked column chart. So I'm gonna go back to my change chart type here, and go to look at the column charts, and there's a stacked column, and then there's also a 100% stacked column. Let's actually look at both of those. Let's try the 100% stacked column. So I'm gonna click OK. So this is again showing, it's got this row and column data switched because it's showing the months up above here instead of the stores. So I'm going to switch row and column data. And there we go. That's what I had in my mind. We've got the for each month, we've got a representation of the percentage of the whole made up by each store. So in this first one on the list is March. It looks like the Aurora store, the red, was the largest piece of the pie, so to speak. And then in May, we had the Denver store was the larger one, as well as in July and August. That, but we're missing January and February. And if you remember, we went to the select data on the ribbon before and unchecked January and February. So I'm going to go back and recheck those and click OK. And there it's added those back to our chart. So that's the 100% stacked column, which is kind of gives you something similar to a pie chart for each month. but this doesn't tell you how the months compare to each other. So I'm going to go back to change chart type and try the stacked column that's not 100%. And that gives us even more information in that you can see the months relative to each other for the total sales. But within each month, you can see the percentage of by each store based on the color there. So that gives you even more information. So again, we're representing our information visually so that we can draw conclusions and get information about our data just by examining the chart. So that's all we're going to do with charts right now, or graphs. Of course, we will be coming back a little bit to that when we look at, because when we do a pivot chart, we'll be able to do a pivot, a pivot table. We'll be able to do a pivot chart as well, which is just a chart or a graph of a pivot table. So I'm going to move on to our auto inventory and dive into pivot tables now. Are there any questions about the charts we were looking at? So a pivot table allows us to organize and summarize selected columns and rows of data in a spreadsheet or database to obtain a desired report. A pivot table doesn't actually change the data, it just summarizes it in a new spreadsheet. So let's look at our data here that we're dealing with. This is an auto inventory list. It is, we've got 46 rows of data. Each row is a vehicle. We've got brand, year, type, and the types are car, truck, or SUV. There's a model field as well. And then we have a price and a date received. So this is an imaginary inventory of a used car lot. From a few years ago. These, I think this was made when these cars were a bit newer. But so let's say, so we have these 46 vehicles listed here, and there's quite a bit of information. But what if I gave you this spreadsheet and said, how much inventory do we have in Ford and Toyota, broken down by type of car and year? So like what's the value of all the Ford cars on the lot? Can you give me the answer in just a split second? And you can do that very quickly with the pivot table. Just a few clicks, you can get a full table of those kinds of totals. And of course, let's just jump in. So I can't be outside of my data if I'm going to insert a pivot table. I'm going to go to the Insert tab. make sure I have a cell selected that's somewhere within my data, and I'm going to click on pivot table. And then I get this dialog box that says, choose the data you want to analyze, select the table or range, and you can see by the moving dotted green line that Excel has already found my data. It was easy for it to find it because I have data that is in a tabular format. And by that, I mean, it doesn't have any blank columns or rows. And so it's all adjacent or touching each other. So I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And it immediately creates a new sheet with a blank space where my pivot table is going to go. And it has a square over here on a pivot table fields. And this is intimidating at first, but as you're playing with pivot tables, I want to recommend that you focus on two of these fields. We've got a list here of these are actually the row headers. So we have brand, year, type, model, price, and date received. And if you notice, as I mouse over them, I get the four-way arrow. I can click and drag these down to any of these four boxes below here. And to keep it simple for now, I'm going to recommend you focus on the rows and the values. And so the rows are going to be what is it that you want to know about, and the values is going to be any numerical fields that you have. So the price is the one numerical field. Technically, date is also numerical, but the price is equivalent to the value. So I'm just going to put the price in the values. And immediately you see I've got a sum of price. And this is the value of all of the cars on the lot. And now and then let's just take the first in the list, we have brand, and I'm just going to drag that down to the rows field. And you see it's immediately populated my pivot table with 2 rows of the 2 brands that are represented in my data with the sum of price for each one, and then a grand total with the total price. So immediately I've got the value of all of my Fords on the lot. And if I want to break it down by type, let's say, I'm going to click and drag type down below the brands, below brand in the rows group, and let go. Now I have a breakdown of all my Fords by type, car, SUV, and truck, and the same thing for my Toyotas. And it's got the sum values already there. So that was just 3 or 4 clicks, and I've got all of those figures ready at hand. Now, the reason they call it a pivot table is because I can just drag and drop these and move them around, and thereby pivot my data and draw out different information. So let's say I want to look at this by year. I'm going to actually jump out for just a second and fast forward in my PowerPoint to the section on pivot tables. So this is little thing from the Microsoft's Help on Pivot Tables webpage. I'm going to go ahead and click on that and show you what that looks like. So they have a video and kind of a lesson, and hidden in here sort of because it was super helpful when I found this. It's this little note right here. Selected fields are added to their default areas. Non-numeric fields are added to rows. Date and time hierarchies are added to columns, and numeric fields are added to values. So I pulled that out here because I think it really helps when you're first looking at pivot tables. I would just focus at first on just these, the non-numeric fields, the stuff you want to know about. You want to put it in the rows column, in the rows group, and then the numeric fields you put in values. And then if you have some date and time hierarchies, they work best in the columns. So we've got a year column here. I'm going to put that in the columns row, or a year header rather. I'm going to put that in the columns group. So now let me spread this out a little bit. We have numbers for the Ford and Toyota by type of vehicle. And then in the columns, we have the years that are available, and we still have the grand total there. So that's a lot of information that we've got. And now if I wanted to, so let's say I don't want to do it by type, I want to look at the model. So if I want to move one of these out of here, I can just click and drag it, and watch what happens if I take the type. You see the four-way arrow when I mouse over it. As I drag it to the left, it becomes that little X, which means like it's like the delete symbol, and I let go, and it just takes it out of there. All I did was dragged it away from this with the square that it was in, and it deleted it. And then we can put in model, and I'm going to drag that down. Now it's got all of the models. And let's say I don't want that either. I'm going to take the model out. Let's take the year and put it down in the rows group there. And you see so now it has Ford separated by 2013 and 2014, and the same thing for Toyota. And we could even put the brand over in the columns. So in spite of the recommendations of where you put things, you can kind of do whatever you want. But if we go back, let me start over, take out the brand, take out the year. Notice the pivot table is still there. It just still is showing the sum of price. And then we can start over. We can go to type first and put that in the rows, and then we've got the totals for all the cars, for all the SUVs and all the trucks. And then I can sort that by brand secondarily this time, put brand after. So now it subdivides all the cars by Fords and Toyotas, and same with SUVs and trucks. And I can change my mind there and just rearrange these. I'm going to click and put brand on top of above type, and it's rearranged them in that way. It seems to make more sense. Let's see, can the fields occupy more than one of the areas below? That's a very good question. So yes, the short answer is yes. If I've got brand and type there. If I take brand and put it in columns, Well, so actually the answer is no. I was thinking of something else. So yeah, if you can't have it in both the rows and the columns, but you can have more than one thing in the values field. I think that's what I was thinking of. So if I put, let me take brand to columns. If I try to put, see if I put type, now they're both in the columns field, and that doesn't make any sense. I'm going to put brand back in the rows, but we can put both in the rows and have it subdivided. But I can take type and put it in values. And you notice because type is not a numerical field, it automatically changed to the count. So this doesn't, I mean, it kind of works, but it doesn't really make sense. Really what we're doing is the equivalent of taking the sum, the count of the price. So let's go back. We'll put type back there, and I'm going to take price and put it into values again. Now I have a duplicate, but I'm going to, and this will actually also address the fact that although we're dealing with money, we have no indication, or our numbers are not formatted correctly, or they're not formatted as currency or as money. If I click the little arrow next to the sum of price here, I want to go to the value field settings. And when I click that, I get this pop-up here. And I can, so there's a couple things I can do here. I can change the name. I'm going to change the sum of price to count. And I'm going to change summarize value field by count. You know, there's other options here. There's average here as well, but I'm going to use count and click OK. Now I have a count of the price, which is the number of vehicles, right? And the sum of price. If I right click, so with pivot tables, the right click is really your best friend. I'm going to right click here. I can also get to the value field settings with the right click. And there's also a number format choice down here. And I can select currency, and I can say, I want 0 decimal places. So I'll change that here, and then click OK, and then OK again. And now I've got my money or currency formatted as currency with the dollar signs and comma separators. And I didn't want decimal places, so I left those out. And I can also click and edit these headings here. So I can put totals where it said sum of price, and I can put count where it said count of price, and that kind of makes more sense. So this is very has a lot of possibilities. I can tease out all kinds of information from my data. So we have count and we have totals. We can easily get an average price. So let's go ahead and add that. I'm going to go drag price down to the values group again. And this time I'm going to click the drop down, go to value field settings and select average and click OK. Now, again, I don't have, I'm just going to highlight the fields, right click and go to number format directly this way and select currency, remove the decimal places, and click OK. And now I've got, and I can just rename that to average. And I've got a nice little summary of my used car lot there. So I've got the average prices of my Fords and my Toyotas and my Ford SUVs, my Toyota SUVs, and a grand total and an average for everything, and a total number of vehicles, and then the numbers of all the different types as well. So there's one field down here that we haven't used yet, and that is filters. Now you should be, if you were in the class from the sort and filter class a couple weeks ago, we talked about filters, so you'll have an idea of what they do. You can see the filter icon there. I'm going to take the year and put it in the filter area, and you may not see right away what happened. It just added this year box up at the top here, and there's a drop down menu and it has 2013 and 2014. So I'm going to just select 2013, click OK. And you may or may not have noticed, but my data automatically updated. So this is the same numbers, but filtered only for 2013. And if I click here again, I can select 2014 and click OK. See the numbers changed. That's my 2014 numbers. So we can do other things. Let's put the year in the columns tab and put the brand in the filter. So now we have a little bit too much going on here. Let me take out those extra values fields. So there's, now we just have the sum of 2013 car by vehicle type and 2014, and then a grand total, and we can filter by brand. So then we can look at, here's all of my information for the Fords. So we can just, you can play with this endlessly, really. One other thing, you may have noticed whenever I update the data or click refresh here, it resizes the columns. They're set to auto fit automatically, and that can be annoying. Let's see, let's bring brand back down to the rows out of the filters. You know, you may have noticed that I've been kind of resizing the columns to kind of space them out a little better. Just to make them look nice. And but whenever I move stuff around, it resizes them automatically. So you can stop that by clicking the options button up here. Let me see if I right click. No, okay. Under options, there's a checkbox here for auto fit column widths on update, and I can uncheck that and click OK. And then I can move stuff around, put the year into the filter area, or take it back to the columns and my rows, my columns stay the same width that I made them. A couple of things more before I'm going to look at another, actually I'm going to do two things before we look at a different data set. For one thing, so when we created this pivot table, it created a new sheet down here. So I'm gonna rename it by I just double clicked down here in the sheet name, and I'm going to just call it pivot table summary. You could just call it a summary, or you could create a dashboard and call it a dashboard. But pivot table summary kind of gives a good overview. And this is for the auto inventory. I noticed it also put the spreadsheet in front of the original data sheet. So let's say here we have some new cars coming on the lot, and I'm just going to copy and paste these and then change some values. Say we get a couple of new Toyotas, and we've got a 2015 and a 2016 models here, and we'll just increase the price 32,511 and make this 26, whatever, 511, same, no problem. And so now let's go back to our pivot table, and if we click the refresh button, nothing happens. And that's, so we have to go back to the data source. There's a change data source button here. And notice, so it's highlighted the data that we have. Notice that it doesn't include our new additions. So a couple of shortcuts here before I tell you a way to avoid this problem altogether. One thing I can do from this position is do Control A, which is the select all. That is Control plus A. And let me see. Just enabled the live transcription. I don't know if that's working. Let me know in the chat if you can see the live transcription. But so Control A will select all my data, and that I can also just click and drag over it. This is a small data set, so I can easily click and drag to select it. If you have a big data set, Control A is probably going to be much easier. And then I click OK, and I come back here and notice that my my data set is automatically updated now. And I have 2015 and 2016 numbers here, and my totals have changed. So a way around this, so I'm going to, I'm just going to delete this table, delete this whole thing and start over. Okay, it looks like the auto captioning is working. Excellent. So one way around having to update my data source is to format this as a table before we insert the pivot table. And the way we do that is we talked a little bit about this when we were in the formulas and functions class. I'm in my data somewhere, and I click insert and go table. and then it automatically highlights my data there, and I click OK. And it gives it this format. If you don't like the color coding that it does here, you can go back to just a simple black and white. You can just unselect that. It's one, I guess, value of that is that it's an indication that it is formatted as a table. There, that black and white is maybe a little easier on the eyes. Or you can just go without any at all. But what it does do is adds the sort and filter drop down buttons, and it gives me the option to name the table, which is really useful, as you'll see. So I can now, in the table name, you can't have any spaces. So with I'm going to call this auto inventory without a space, and hit enter. And now when I go to insert pivot table, notice under the table range, it just has the name of the table. And it also automatically selects a new worksheet, but you can put it on the same worksheet by just checking the box here. Just going to click OK, and then we're back where we started. So another thing that you can do, and it doesn't always work that well, but I can just check these boxes and they automatically fill in those fields. So I checked brand and I checked price, and it automatically put brand in the rows box and price in the values box. And if I check year, it put that in the columns, but it also put year in the values, which doesn't make sense. It says sum of year, which is not what I wanted. So let's put year in the columns manually, and there we go. Now you can resize these, make them a little more even. And remember, I added 2015 and 21 vehicle each for 2015 and 2016. So now those are showing up here. And again, the easiest way to format the numbers may be to right click and select currency and take the decimals away. And there's my my pivot table. I'm gonna spread these out a little, and we can notice when I click away from my pivot table, my sidebar controller is gone, and also the contextual tab of the pivot table tools on the ribbon are gone. If I click on it again, there's my pivot table tools, and there's my sidebar with the pivot table fields. And I was going to just throw type down into the rows as well to complete this, and I'm going to adjust my options to not to auto fit column widths, and spread this out a little bit so that it looks kind of even. And there's a good looking pivot table. So another thing, the last thing before I show you another data set to apply some of these ideas to, is I want to show another way that you can use filters that is super handy. I'm going to take year over to filters from the columns. And then I'm going to use what is called a slicer. A slicer is a visual representation of a filter, and it allows you to interact with it much more easily. So I'm going to go up to the Analyze tab on the pivot table tools here, and there's an Insert Slicer option. I'm going to insert a year slicer, but I've also got the year filter here, and I'll show you why. I'm going to select, so when I click Insert Slicer, it shows me all of my pivot table fields, which again are just the column headers from my data set. I'm going to select year and click OK. And now here's my slicer. And this lets me click on a year and get the data for that year of all of my 2013 vehicles are now summarized here. And it shows it up here as well, which can be handy just in case you kind of forget. And I can also click on multiple years. So here I've selected 2014 and 2015 by clicking and dragging. And I can also use the control button to select. So if I select 2013, hold down control and select 2015, that does those 2 years. There's also let's see, what is it called? The multi-check, which you don't have to use control. You can just click on multiple ones and it if I turn that, have it on, then I can check multiple ones. If I turn it off, when I can only click one at a time unless I use the control button. So that's a slicer. So we could have a brand slicer as well. Let me go back to Insert Slicer and select Brand and click OK. And I can resize these, and I can also kind of control the format and the look of them too. Up here on Slicer Tools, you notice there are some, I can change the color and that sort of thing. Let's put the, put the brand here closer. And if I select Ford or Toyota, then it only shows me those numbers. And so if I select Ford in 2015, there's nothing here because I only had one vehicle that was 2015, and that was Toyota. So if I click Toyota, then you see that one car show up, and that's my total, the value of that one Toyota car. And if I select multiple years, I get different totals, and I can just play with this. And then of course you have the clear filter option, which reselects everything and gives you the full thing. So slicers are really are just fancy visual representations of filters, but they're really fun and easy to use, and makes it easy to interact with your pivot table and just pivot that data to dig in and get whatever subset of the data that you want. So I'm going to jump back to my PowerPoint. And so this is a kind of visual representation of what we've been doing with our tables here. So you have the rows field shows up here in the pivot table. The sum of price is the calculation and the values that are shown within the data of the table, or within the center of the table in the totals. And then you have the brand here in this example in the columns, in green, it comes up here, and then the filter goes up at the top here. And you can also add a slicer for the filter. And if you have a filter field in this box, when you change the slicer, it will show what is selected in that spot. So there's a version of this, a PDF of this PowerPoint in the class materials list. And so here's some keyboard shortcuts, a kind of review of some of the keyboard shortcuts that we've used before. So you can zoom your view with the Control plus the scroll wheel on your mouse. You can zoom out or zoom in. By holding Control and using the scroll wheel. Moving ahead to the other resources, because I wanted to focus on, so here's some GCF Learn Free lessons that has very thorough lessons on graphs or charts and pivot tables, as well as this is some of the other materials that we did previously that are listed, the lessons that correspond with the topics that we had in earlier classes. And there's a couple of other external sites, or no, these are GCF Learn Free extras that are not in they're not numbered lessons, but they have extra material, some good stuff there. But here's what, and I realize I have a duplicate slide for this, but there is an Excel or a group of an Excel tutor on YouTube named John Acampora. His site is called Excel Campus, and that's sort of his brand. And he has a really interesting 3-part tutorial on pivot table dashboards, or let's see, I'm going to go ahead and click through, and oh, come on. What's that? Here it is.
Hello there, and welcome to the Excel Campus YouTube channel.
So this is his site. He has very good tutorials, but this group of tutorials, oh, that's the wrong link somehow. Let's see, let me see, part 2 should come up.
Welcome to Excel Campus.
Yeah, so this is part 2, and it's and then in the description here, it should have a link to part 1. It's Introduction to Pivot Tables, Charts, and Dashboards. And each one is about 15 minutes long. So it's a little long, and but I also mentioned that he has, he's actually selling a tool called, what is it called? It's Pivot Pal, I think it's called. But so each of these videos is about 15 minutes, but if you can, only the last part of the video is he selling his tool, which is, it's not a gimmicky thing. I'm sure it's useful if you're a professional accountant, maybe. But you can just watch up to the indication that I have here. That's where he starts talking about the Pivot Pal. It's not bad information. It's just superfluous if you're just trying to get the idea of what pivot tables are. But he does a really nice job of presenting the full power of pivot tables. I'm going to just do a little bit with his data. Let me see. So that's the sample data. I'm going to download these and give you a view of them. So his sample data is looks like this. It's a lot, but it's you can scroll over, you can see it goes to from A to Z, so that's 26 columns. And incidentally, when Excel gets to Z, it starts over with AA and AB and AC. So you can just keep going. It will keep adding letters. But what we have here is order details for an entire year of a sales company, and there's order date, customer information, name, address, city, state, country, and then there's a salesperson and region information. There's a shipping date, shipper name, ship name, and eventually there's the payment type, product name, category of each product, unit price, quantity, revenue, shipping fee. And so it's a lot of data. I'm going to use, remember the control down arrow will jump to the last row of the set. So there's 372 rows here. So it's a lot of data, but it's not super huge. It's enough to kind of get your head around. But it's the number of columns here is, I think, realistic for like a realistic company that was selling things would have this kind of data. And I'm going to go ahead and just insert a pivot table and click OK. It's found my data. He hasn't made this a table. I would recommend doing that if you are working with the data this size, because you might have another year or years plural to add to this data and then if you format it as a table, then it's going to automatically update your pivot table. So we'll click OK, and you can see all of those columns are listed here. So let's just take the salesperson to rows and take the revenue to values. And so you see we've got a list of names and we have a sum of revenue. I'm going to go into the value field settings for the sum of revenue and update that format to currency minus decimal places. Just round it, keep it rounded to the nearest whole dollar. And then let's say we might want to sort this by largest to smallest here. So again, the right click is super useful in dealing with the pivot table. I can just right click and then click right click on one of my values in the sum of revenue column, and I can sort largest to smallest. And then I can demonstrate, and this is basically what this guy John does in his tutorial. Now I want to visually represent this with a pivot chart, and there's in the pivot table tools here on the ribbon, there's a pivot chart button, and I'm just going to select the first one, clustered column, click OK, and just take out, it's a filter option, I don't really need that. Let's see, can he just deleted those, but they're not wanting to, they're going away. But I can change my name here to sales 2021. No, I think it was 2014. And take out those lines. I think I let's see. I'm gonna increase the gap or decrease the gap width to make those lines a little fatter. Anyway, he does all of this stuff, but then one of the things that he does is you can copy this. I'm going to copy this pivot tables sheet, and then where's my, oh, I need to show my field list again, and then take out my sales person from the rows, and then add in, what did he do? He did take the categories, and you see my chart is still here, and now I've got a list of the categories and the sales by category with the chart, and I can sort these largest to smallest again, and then let's see, I probably want to name these. I'll say sales by salesperson and that sheet, and then this is categories, and The coolest thing that I'm going to just show real quick, you can copy these onto a new spreadsheet in the total sales. And no, let's see, that was, well, I'm getting in the weeds a little bit here. I needed to update this heading to categories. Okay, let's just jump. We're almost out of time. I have the sample data. The final product that he creates here is a dashboard. And here's his dashboard. And so he's got all of these pivot charts based on pivot tables. From here are all the different pivot tables, but he's copied all the charts into a dashboard with 2 slicers. So watch as I click on the slicer, all of the charts update because they're all connected to the slicer. And the way that he's done that is if you click on the slicer tools here, there's a report connections. You see he's connected this slicer to all of these different pivot tables, so that when you click the slicer, you can get a subset of your data, and all of the tables, charts update automatically. It's very impressive the way he's done it, and he's gone through all of the different steps that brings him to that based on this this large mass of source data. That really, for me, it really filled out what pivot tables can do. The power of pivot tables. It's some of the simpler examples are kind of not complicated enough to really demonstrate the power of it. And so that's why I liked his thing. It's also kind of a real world example. So, and he gets into some charts and graphs as well. Another YouTube tutorial person that I like is named Leila Garani. She has nice tutorials that are well done and easy to follow. So that's it for today. Please take a moment to fill out the evaluation that we'll post in the chat here. There's an evaluation. It just takes a couple of minutes. Let us know what worked well, what didn't, and or what other classes you'd be interested to see. And you can always schedule an appointment for one-on-one with me if you have particular Excel questions and or problems, or just want to continue learning. I really recommend jumping into some of these other tutorials in the GCF Learn Free in particular for the basics. If you had trouble following today, I would say go back to the GCF Learn Free. If you want to get deeper into some of this, check out some of these other YouTube tutorials. And remember, there's always the Excel help feature as well, which is F1 on your keyboard. Brings up these Excel help. You can search it and find videos and tutorials on everything you ever wanted to know about Excel. So thanks for attending. And we have one more class in this series. If you want to come back, we're going to do some more Excel formulas and functions. It's a new class I'm doing that's on part 5. Some of it will be a review of the concepts we talked about last week in the formulas and functions class, but I also want to maybe spend some time on VLOOKUP, which is something I've gotten questions about before, which is a very commonly used function in business that lets you pull data from one spreadsheet to another. So that if you have more than one complicated spreadsheet that are connected by one field, then you can bring the data together into one spreadsheet using the VLOOKUP. So thanks again. We'll see you next time.